Fake justice clown. That was the insult Donald Trump, the 47th President of the United States, spat across the chamber at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. In a nation where over 65 million Americans say they no longer trust their leaders, this wasn't just politics. This was a collision of power and justice, arrogance and truth. Inside that hearing room, every word was a weapon. Every insult was amplified by 40 million viewers watching live, and every second pushed the confrontation closer to a breaking point. Trump, the master of chaos. Crockett, the warrior of justice. And on this day, their clash would erupt into one of the most explosive political battles in modern American history. The gavel had barely struck when the room was ripped apart by fury. No polite opening, no diplomatic warm-up, just fire, venom, and voices colliding. Donald Trump leaned forward, his voice slicing through the chamber like broken glass. "Fake justice, clown! A pathetic puppet dressed up as a warrior," he sneered, his lips curling into that trademark smirk that millions recognized. Half entertainment, half threat. Gasps filled the room. For a split second, silence strangled the air, as if the insult had slapped not only Jasmine Crockett, but the very institution of Congress itself. Jasmine did not flinch. Her eyes locked on Trump, sharp as blades, unyielding as stone. Then she struck back. "You talk of justice? You," she spat, her voice ringing like steel against steel, "are nothing more than a traitor to the very idea of justice." The chamber erupted. Some roared in approval, others jeered, but no one could look away. The cameras zoomed in. Beads of sweat glistened on Trump's temple. The taut line of Crockett's jaw trembling with fury, yet controlled like a warrior's stance. The chairman hammered the gavel again and again. "Order! Order in this room!" But order was dead. This was no longer a hearing. It was a battlefield. Trump leaned back in his chair, hands spread wide in mocking theater. "Look at her!" he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. "A nobody, a loudmouth desperate for attention. You don't belong here, Jasmine. You don't belong at this table." The insult echoed, bouncing off the walls. Some of his allies chuckled under their breath, feeding off his arrogance. The scene was poisonous, electric, ready to detonate. Jasmine inhaled deeply, her voice, calm but carrying the weight of thunder, cut through the mockery. "I belong here because the people put me here. I belong here because truth still matters in this country, even if it terrifies you." The words hit like a hammer. Even Trump's grin faltered for the briefest flicker. It was the kind of reply that stripped away his armor of bravado, forcing him to feel the sting of exposure. The audience outside, millions watching from their living rooms, their phones, their workplaces, and felt the shift. Clips of the exchange were already being recorded, already destined to explode across social media within minutes. Justice versus power. Truth versus the performance of lies. But inside the room, the battle pressed on, relentless. Trump slammed a palm against the desk, leaning forward, his voice booming. "You're nothing but a disgrace to America." Jasmine did not blink. "You are the disgrace," she fired back instantly. "Every lie you tell, every word you twist, every law you trample. You are the living definition of betrayal." The gavel struck again. The chairman's voice cracked. "Control yourselves." But control was a corpse lying at their feet. This was raw, unfiltered combat, a collision that could no longer be contained. Trump's face reddened, his words spilling faster, angrier. "You think you're strong? You think people care about your little crusade? You're a fraud, a weak fraud, hiding behind cheap theatrics." Jasmine leaned in, her voice low but razor sharp, every syllable coated with ice. "The difference between us is simple, Mr. President. I fight for justice. You fight for yourself." It was a scalpel to his chest, a simple cut, but deep enough to bleed. Gas once again rippled through the chamber. The tension was unbearable. Every glance, every breath was magnified. The cameras zoomed in closer, Trump's jaw grinding, Jasmine's fists tightening against the wood of the desk, the chairman's desperate eyes darting left and right like a man trying to hold back a flood. And then, as if on cue, The insults escalated again. "You're weak," Trump spat. "You're corrupt," Jasmine returned. "You're nothing. You're finished." Each word was a bullet, each reply a counterstrike. The room had transformed into an arena where truth and deception clashed in brutal rhythm. People watching at home couldn't look away. For them, this wasn't politics anymore. It was survival, the fight of their lives acted out through two figures locked in verbal war. And as the shouting grew louder, as the chamber shook with rage, one thing became terrifyingly clear. This was only the beginning. The chairman's gavel cracked against the desk again, desperate, almost trembling. "Order! Order in this chamber!" he barked, though his voice betrayed the strain of a man already losing control. At last, after what felt like an eternity of chaos, the noise dulled into a charged silence. The chairman leaned forward, his knuckles white on the wooden podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, each word heavy with reluctance, "this hearing convenes today to examine accusations of abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and violations of the very principles this nation stands upon." A murmur rippled through the room, some gasps, some scoffs. The tension clung to every corner like smoke. Jasmine Crockett saw her opening. Her body straightened, her voice steady but blazing with conviction. "Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and to the American people watching right now," she declared, "we are here because one man believes he is above the law, because one man has twisted truth into theater and turned leadership into self-service." Her words carried like thunder across the chamber. Every syllable was sharp, deliberate, undeniable. The cameras swung toward her, capturing the fire in her eyes, the unwavering steel in her tone. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk plastered on his face as if mocking the very air around him. And then, that laugh. The infamous Trump chuckle, low and derisive, designed not to amuse but to humiliate. He waited until the room had fully absorbed Jasmine's thunder, then leaned forward with exaggerated patience. "Oh, here we go again," he sneered. "The self-righteous crusader, pretending she's Joan of Arc, when in reality she's nothing more than a desperate politician chasing headlines." The jab landed like poison. His allies chuckled, shaking their heads, basking in his arrogance. For them, it was entertainment. For millions watching at home, it was infuriating. But Jasmine didn't blink. Her eyes narrowed, her voice rose, cutting clean through the mockery. "Desperate? No, Mr. President. Desperate is clinging to lies when the evidence is stacked against you. Desperate is mocking justice because you fear what the truth will reveal." A collective gasp swelled from the audience. The tension was now unbearable, like a storm pressing against the windows, ready to break. Trump tilted his head, feigning amusement. "Evidence?" he mocked. "Please, you've got nothing but rumors, gossip, and your own delusions. This is a witch hunt, the greatest witch hunt in history. Millions know it, millions see it, and millions stand with me, not with you." The chamber erupted again. Half the room clapped, half shouted in rage. Outside, hashtags exploded, timelines filled with clips and quotes, each side weaponizing words within seconds. Justice versus spectacle. Truth versus denial. The chairman pounded the gavel once more, his voice cracking as he fought to regain order. But it was too late. The floodgates had opened. Jasmine raised her voice above the noise, refusing to be drowned out. "You call this a witch hunt? Then let every American watching decide for themselves. Let them see the documents you tried to bury, the testimonies you tried to silence, the lies you told under oath." Her words struck like lightning. Trump's smirk faltered, only for a heartbeat, but enough for the cameras to catch. That fleeting crack in his mask spread like wildfire across the feeds, dissected frame by frame, broadcast on every network. And yet he refused to yield. Slamming his fist on the desk, his voice thundered through the chamber. "You don't scare me. You will never scare me. Because the truth is, you don't represent justice. You represent chaos. And the people know it." His declaration split the room in two. Shouts, boos, cheers, applause. The chamber was a battlefield of noise, every word turning into a weapon, every reaction fueling the next strike. Jasmine stood unshaken, Her hand pressed firmly against her notes, though she hardly needed them. Her voice steadied, colder now, sharper. Chaos is what happens when a leader believes he is untouchable. Chaos is what happens when lies sit on the throne of truth. And today, Mr. President, the chaos ends. The words hit like a final hammer. A silence, brief but deafening, swept the chamber. For the first time, even Trump's loyalists shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of her conviction pressed down on them all. But then, that smile returned, arrogant, defiant, unyielding. It was Trump's greatest weapon, the refusal to look beaten, even when the ground beneath him trembled. And so, the war of words raged on. Every accusation sharpened like a blade. Every response twisted into mockery. The chamber was no longer divided by party lines, but by a raw and primal struggle between truth and deception. Millions watched. Millions argued in real time. But every single one of them was hooked. Unable to turn away, unable to blink, unable to breathe without wondering what the next word, the next insult, the next revelation would be. And deep down, everyone knew it. This was no ordinary hearing. This was destiny being written in real time. And then, like a predator scenting weakness, Trump struck. He leaned forward, eyes glinting, his voice dropping low before rising like a tidal wave. "You want to talk about justice?" he snarled. "Let's talk about you, Jasmine Crockett, the so-called warrior of truth. The truth is, your record is a disgrace. Your past is full of failures. You've betrayed the very people you claim to protect." The words cracked like whips across the chamber. Gasps erupted. Heads turned. Cameras zoomed in. Every syllable from Trump was fired like a bullet, deliberate, ruthless. "You sit here pretending to be pure, pretending to be some kind of savior," he spat. "But the facts are clear. You've lied, you've schemed. You've climbed your way here on manipulation, not merit. Tell the American people about your backroom deals. Tell them about the scandals you buried. Tell them how much of your campaign was built on deception." The accusations hit like a barrage of punches. Each one drew murmurs from the audience, each one planting seeds of doubt in the minds of those watching at home. Jasmine's knuckles tightened around her notes, but she did not look away. Her eyes burned, locked onto Trump's, a silent refusal to flinch. But Trump wasn't finished. He slammed the table with his palm, his voice booming with theatrical fury. "This is the woman who dares to lecture me about law and order? This is the woman who wants to call me a criminal? Look at her. Look at her record. Look at the trail of broken promises and corruption she leaves behind." The chamber buzzed like a hornet's nest. Reporters scribbled furiously. Phones lit up with breaking news alerts. Across the nation, living rooms and offices fell silent, ears glued to every word. It was no longer just politics. It was character assassination, live and unfiltered. Jasmine's jaw tightened. Her chest rose and fell with controlled fury. Her silence was not weakness. It was the calm before the storm. Her eyes, sharp as drawn steel, never wavered from her opponent. But Trump pressed harder, sensing the tension. He pointed directly at her, his finger jabbing the air like a weapon. "Tell America about the deals you cut with lobbyists. Tell them about the donors you bent to. Tell them how you built your career not on justice, but on ambition. You are no warrior. You are a fraud." The word fraud echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. A hush fell. For a heartbeat, even the chaos stilled, as if the entire country inhaled at once. And then, the roar. Shouts from the audience. Cries of disbelief. Cheers from Trump loyalists. It was as though the hearing had transformed into a stadium, each side cheering for their fighter, each blow landing like a hook to the jaw. The chairman's gavel was lost beneath the noise. The cameras panned wildly, catching every angle. Trump's fury, Jasmine's stillness, the audience's frenzy. This was not dialogue. This was combat. A boxing match of words, each strike meant to wound, each counterstrike waiting to land. And in that storm, Jasmine remained unmoved, her shoulders squared, her gaze locked. Her silence spoke louder than any protest could. Trump, emboldened, spread his arms wide, feeding off the crowd's reaction. "You see? She has nothing to say. Nothing. Because the truth is, she can't defend herself. She can't defend her record. She can't defend her lies. The chamber erupted again, split down the middle, one half chanting his name, the other half shouting him down. The energy was electric, dangerous, volatile. At home, millions of Americans leaned forward in their chairs. For them, this was no longer a hearing. It was a reckoning. It was blood sport. Jasmine finally drew in a deep breath. Her lips parted, but she did not rush. She let the chaos burn itself out around her. Her silence was not surrender. It was strategy. The camera caught her eyes steady as a blade, focused like a bowstring pulled to its limit. And though Trump raged on, his voice thundering through the chamber, there was something unnerving in her calm. She was waiting. Waiting for the perfect opening. Waiting to unleash her own strike. And America could feel it. Every viewer sensed it, the tension tightening like a coil. This was not Trump's victory. This was his gamble. Because in the arena of words, the loudest punch is not always the deadliest. And Jasmine Crockett was about to prove it. She rose slowly, deliberately, like a warrior stepping into the ring for the final round. Her voice, when it came, was not rushed, not frantic. It was steady, commanding, resonant. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, and to the millions watching at home, she began, her tone vibrating with unshakable conviction. Let's cut through the noise. Let's cut through the lies. Because the truth does not tremble. The truth does not yield. The chamber hushed. Even Trump, arms folded, smirk still plastered on his face, leaned in without realizing it. Jasmine lifted a folder of documents high enough for the cameras to catch. Her hand did not shake. Her eyes pierced straight into the lens, as if speaking directly to the nation. This, she declared, flipping the folder open, is the evidence he told you didn't exist. This is the paper trail he said was gossip. This is the proof of what he's tried to bury. Gasps. Reporters leaned forward in unison. The first sheet was held up, projected instantly onto screens behind her. Financial records, wire transfers, signatures, dates. Every line screamed contradiction to Trump's carefully woven narrative. Here, she continued, her voice rising, are the transactions that tie him to lobbyists he swore he never met. Here are the payments funneled through shell accounts he called fake. Here are the numbers, bold and undeniable, that paint a portrait of corruption in his own handwriting. The room shook with murmurs. On social media, timelines exploded. Within seconds, hashtags flooded the digital arena. #Justice Warrior. #Truth Unmasked. #Receipts Don't Lie. Jasmine pressed forward, relentless. Her words now struck like hammers, each syllable pounding through the chamber, reverberating in the chest of every listener. You call me a fraud? You call me desperate? Her eyes cut toward Trump, blazing. The only desperation here is yours. The desperation of a man cornered by his own record. A man who screams witch hunt while drowning in his own cauldron of deceit. The audience erupted. Shouts, applause, furious objections. The chairman's gavel slammed, but it was drowned out by the tidal wave of voices. Trump's jaw tightened. He shifted in his chair, his smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. But then, like a gambler bluffing his last hand, he leaned back, folded his arms again, and forced the smirk back onto his face. The cameras didn't miss it. Neither did the millions watching. Jasmine's voice rolled on, unrelenting. This nation was built on accountability, on the belief that no man, no matter how powerful, no matter how loud, stands above the law. And today that principle is tested not by me, but by him. She raised another page, another piece of evidence, each more damning than the last. Emails, testimonies, signed statements. The chamber seemed to shrink under the weight of the revelations. Social media detonated. Clips went viral within seconds. Trisha Justice Warrior trended at lightning speed, her name igniting across every platform, every feed, every headline. Trump's fingers tapped the desk, faster now, betraying his unease. His eyes darted once quickly toward his counsel. The mask of untouchable confidence held, but it was fraying at the edges. Jasmine pressed the attack. Her voice now thundered, rising above the noise, resonating like a verdict. You asked who I am, Mr. President. I'll tell you, I am the voice of every citizen betrayed by corruption. I am the voice of every community abandoned while you built monuments to yourself. I am the voice of the people you swore to serve, and I will not be silenced. The chamber erupted again, but this time, the wave was hers. Applause rolled like thunder. Cheering cut through the noise of outrage. And online, millions rallied behind her, their posts echoing her words, their anger fueling her rise. Trump's expression tightened further. He forced another chuckle, another dismissive shake of the head. But his voice, when it finally came, was slower, heavier. More lies, more theater. You think people believe this? You think your little show means anything? Pathetic. But even as he said it, the confidence faltered. Because the show did mean something. Because people were believing. Because, for the first time, the balance of the fight was tipping against him. And Jasmine knew it. Her eyes didn't leave him. Her posture never wavered. She had landed her blow, and she could feel the tremor ripple across the room, across the nation, across the man who had once seemed untouchable. This was no longer defense. This was attack. This was Jasmine Crockett's rise, broadcast live to millions, etched into the memory of history. And as the chairman's gavel slammed once more, struggling to contain the eruption, the truth could no longer be hidden. The tide had turned. Trump's smirk faltered, his silence stretching longer than usual, and that was all it took for his allies to leap into action. One of his staunchest defenders, a congressman known for fiery theatrics, shot up from his seat like a guard dog sensing blood. "Mr. Chairman," he barked, his voice slicing through the clamor. "This entire line of questioning is biased, inappropriate, and clearly designed to smear the President of the United States. I will not stand here and watch this circus continue." Another ally quickly followed, pounding the desk with his fist. "She's grandstanding. She's turning this hearing into a trial by media. This is nothing but a sham, a disgrace to this institution." Their voices overlapped, building a wall of noise meant to shield Trump, to deflect the blows that had begun to pierce his armor. The chairman's gavel came down again, harder this time. "Order! Order!" he shouted, though his voice cracked with the strain. Caught between duty and politics, he looked like a man sinking into quicksand. Every attempt to steady the chamber only dragged him deeper. Trump leaned back, regaining his smirk, letting his allies do the fighting. He adjusted his tie, savoring the noise, the chaos. For him, distraction was survival. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Her eyes remained locked, not on the allies, not on the chairman, but on Trump himself. It was as if the others didn't exist, mere shadows dancing around the real battle. When the shouting dulled, she leaned forward, her voice cut clean through the tension, cold and precise. "You can send every ally in this chamber to your defense, Mr. President, but the truth does not scatter that easily." The words drew a fresh murmur from the audience, a sting too sharp to ignore. Her gaze never left him, pinning him to the chair, forcing him to face her. Trump's allies tried again, voices cracking with urgency. "Mr. Chairman, she's out of line," one protested. "This is nothing but character assassination," cried another. But Jasmine didn't blink. She held up a second sheet of paper, her voice steady as steel. "This document isn't character assassination. It's accountability, and the American people deserve answers." The chairman hesitated, torn between order and chaos, between silencing the eruption and allowing history to unfold. Finally, with a heavy breath, he gestured. "Proceed, Congresswoman," he said, the words reluctant, inevitable. A hush blanketed the room. Even Trump's allies fell silent, forced into uneasy stillness. Jasmine drew in a breath. Her next words landed with the force of a blade-piercing armor. "Mr. President, if these records are false, if this trail of money and influence is fabricated, then answer one simple question." She paused, letting the silence stretch until it burned. The chamber leaned forward, hearts pounding, breaths held. The nation itself seemed to pause. Her eyes locked onto his, unyielding. "Why does your signature appear on them?" The chamber gasped as if struck by lightning. Reporters shot up from their seats. Cameras zoomed in so close that every twitch, every bead of sweat, Every flicker in Trump's expression was magnified for millions to see. For a split second, just one, Trump froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes darted, calculating, cornered. It was the hesitation Jasmine had been waiting for. The opening she had carved through fire and fury. The audience erupted, half in shock, half in triumph, half in rage. It was a thunderstorm of voices impossible to contain. Trump's allies scrambled, shouting over the noise, throwing themselves into the flames to protect him. "This is outrageous," one roared. "Fabrication! Forgery!" cried another. They flailed like shields riddled with cracks, desperate to patch the hole that had been ripped open. But it was too late. The image was burned into memory. The all-powerful Trump, faltering under a single undeniable question. The chairman's gavel pounded, his voice trembling with desperation. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But the chamber no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the storm, to the battle, to the two figures at its center. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, unshaken, her eyes blazing with the certainty of victory. Trump sat rigid, mask cracking, his silence louder than any denial he could muster. And across America, millions of viewers whispered the same thought. For the first time, he looked vulnerable. And Jasmine Crockett seized that moment like a blade poised above an enemy's throat. She placed her hands firmly on the table, leaned forward, and let her voice cut through the storm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, "you've seen the records, you've heard the words, but what you haven't seen, what he prayed you would never see, is this." From beneath her stack of papers, Jasmine pulled a sealed envelope. It was thick, stamped with the insignia of a federal agency, and marked confidential. The room inhaled as one. Cameras zoomed in, their lenses catching the bold red letters on the cover. Reporters nearly leapt from their seats. Jasmine's hand tore the seal with deliberate precision, the sound of ripping paper amplified in the silence. She withdrew several sheets, each one trembling slightly under the weight of history. "This," she said, raising the first page high, "is classified correspondence, official communications, withheld from the public, connecting Donald J. Trump directly to decisions that endangered national security." The chamber erupted in gasps, whispers, a flurry of voices colliding. It was no longer debate, it was revelation. Trump's eyes darted just for a moment, betraying something rare. Uncertainty. His lips pressed tight, his jaw stiffened. For once, the mask was cracking in real time. Jasmine's voice grew louder, resonant, unshakable. "These are not rumors. These are not theories. These are government records, authenticated and verified, showing conversations he denied ever having, showing deals he swore never existed." She spread the documents across the table for the cameras to capture. Names, dates, directives, every word branded into the public eye. The sound in the chamber was electric. Whispers buzzed like locusts. Gasps overlapped, growing into a tidal wave of disbelief. Members of Congress leaned forward, mouths slightly agape. The camera swept across their faces. Shock, awe, disbelief, and fear. One senator's eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. Another pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle a gasp. The images raced across screens nationwide, immortalized in headlines that would break within seconds. And in the center of it all sat Trump, his posture stiff, his eyes shifting, his composure flickering like a flame fighting against wind. He opened his mouth, ready to dismiss it all as forgery, as fabrication. But Jasmine's voice cut him off like steel slamming against steel. "Before you deny it," she said coldly, "understand this. These documents come with signatures. They come with timestamps. They come with witnesses. And every line you dismiss only drags you deeper into the hole you've dug for yourself." The chamber fell still again, the silence almost unbearable. For the viewers at home, time seemed to freeze. Millions sat on couches, eyes locked, hearts pounding. They weren't just watching politics. They were watching truth ignite like fire in the middle of a storm. Trump shifted in his chair, forcing his trademark smirk back onto his face, though his eyes betrayed him. They flickered, restless, calculating. He was rattled, and the cameras feasted on every micro-expression. His allies stirred, whispering furiously among themselves. But even they looked shaken. The revelation had cut deeper than expected, and no amount of shouting could unring that bell. Jasmine didn't relent. Her words came like hammer blows. You can sneer, you can mock, you can shout, but you cannot erase what's written here. You cannot erase the truth etched into these pages. And every American watching deserves to see it for themselves. She held up another page, turning toward the cameras deliberately. The nation watched as the damning words filled their screens. The chamber convulsed with reaction. Some voices cried out in rage, others in triumph. But one truth was undeniable. The balance of power in that room had shifted forever. The chairman's gavel pounded again, though now it seemed feeble against the storm. His voice was hoarse, strained. Order! I demand order! But there was no order. There was only chaos, and Jasmine was its conductor. Trump finally spoke, his voice low, edged with fury. Lies, all lies. This is fabricated trash, and you know it. Everyone here knows it. But the words felt hollow, thinner than before. The cracks in his armor had widened, and everyone in that chamber, and everyone watching at home, could see it. And as the cameras swept across the stunned faces of senators, congressmen, and aides, the truth became undeniable. The secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. Trump's hand slammed against the polished wood of the witness table, the sound like a cannon shot. The chamber jolted, papers scattered. A glass of water rattled violently, nearly toppling. His face flushed crimson, veins standing out on his neck. You think you can humiliate me with this garbage? He roared, voice cracking the air like thunder. This is a witch hunt, the greatest hoax in American history, and you, his fingers shot toward Jasmine like a spear, are nothing but a liar, a fraud, a disgrace. The force of his fury shook the chamber. Some lawmakers flinched, others leaned in, feeding on the spectacle. Cameras devoured every frame, every tremor in his voice. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She stood as still as a statue, her chin lifted, her eyes burning with a defiance that silenced even the whispers. The storm howled before her, and yet she didn't take a single step back. Her face was radiant with something larger than anger. It was justice itself, fierce and unyielding. Every flicker of the cameras caught her expression. Not fear, not doubt, but fire. Trump slammed the table again, the echo ricocheting off marble walls. You don't scare me, he bellowed. You'll never scare me. This is all political theater, a circus. And you, he spat the word with venom, you are the clown. The chamber erupted into chaos. His allies pounded the desks, shouting in agreement. Opponents shouted back, voices clashing, swelling into a storm of rage. The chairman's gavel cracked again and again, wood striking wood, desperate to command order. Enough! Enough! Order in this chamber! But his words drowned in the roar. The hearing had become a battlefield, a war of lungs and fury. Trump's voice towered above it all, raw and furious. I built this country stronger than anyone before me, stronger than her, stronger than all of you combined. And I will not be destroyed by some second-rate prosecutor in a cheap suit waving forged papers. He leaned forward, chest heaving, eyes blazing. It wasn't just a defense anymore. It was survival. And still, Jasmine didn't move. Her eyes locked on him, steady, unbroken. Not a flinch, not a blink. Only the unshakable conviction of someone who had chosen her ground and refused to yield an inch. The cameras caught it, the perfect duel. His fury versus her calm, his chaos versus her clarity. And outside those marble walls, millions of Americans sat transfixed. In living rooms, bars, airports, they held their breath. Some clenched their fists, furious at the man who raged. Others cheered him on, feeding on his anger. But all of them, every last one, could not look away. The chairman's gavel struck again, louder, desperate. Mr. Trump, Miss Crockett, this hearing will not descend into disorder. But it already had. It was no longer a hearing, it was a reckoning. Trump leaned back, nostrils flaring, fists still trembling on the table. He glared across at Jasmine, waiting for her to cower, to retreat, to break beneath the weight of his rage. But Jasmine only drew a slow breath, her voice rising calm and resonant, slicing through the cacophony like a bell tolling in fog. You can scream, you can pound the table, you can try to drown this room with your fury, but you cannot drown the truth. The words landed heavy, like stones cast into turbulent water. The chamber quivered, the shouting faltered, the gavel hung suspended. Her voice carried, unshaken. Your rage is not strength, it's fear, and every American watching can see it. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Trump, chest still heaving, seemed caught in the weight of those words. For one suspended moment, it felt as if time itself held its breath. The volcano had erupted, the fire had burned, and now the world waited for the next blow. And in that pause, with millions watching live, one truth burned brighter than all the noise. This was no longer politics. This was combat, and the first climax had only just begun. But Donald Trump had survived too many battles to keep swinging blindly. The fury subsided, just enough for calculation to slip back into his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, shoulders loosening, lips curling into that familiar smirk. The chamber braced. The storm was shifting. "Oh, look at her," he sneered, voice dripping with mockery. "The so-called warrior of justice, the internet's new hero. You practice those little speeches in the mirror, Jasmine? Do you write them down in your diary next to the stickers and glitter pens?" Laughter rippled through his allies. The cruelty in his tone wasn't subtle. It was a scalpel, meant to slice away her dignity piece by piece. He pressed harder. "You don't belong here. This is a stage for leaders, not amateurs. You're not fighting for justice. You're fighting for likes, for retweets, for 15 minutes of fame." The words slithered through the chamber, sharp, calculated, poison wrapped in sarcasm. And yet Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She waited for the noise to subside, her hands folded neatly before her. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, calm enough to cut deeper than shouting ever could. "Mr. Trump," she said, her tone surgical, "you confuse me with yourself." The chamber froze. It was a blade of a sentence honed to perfection. "You spent 4 years treating the presidency like a reality show, 4 years chasing cameras instead of truth, and now you mistake my pursuit of justice for your addiction to spectacle." A murmur rippled across the chamber. Some chuckled. Others gasped. On social media, fingers flew across keyboards, turning her words into the first of many viral clips. Trump's smirk wavered, just for a second, but he recovered quickly, leaning forward, his grin stretched wide. "Cute, very cute. You think one clever line makes you smart? You're out of your league, sweetheart." The word sweetheart hit the air like a spark in a dry field. The chamber stiffened. Even some of his own allies winced. Jasmine didn't blink. Her voice sharpened. "You can call me names, you can belittle me, but here's the truth. Every insult you throw says more about you than it does about me." Her eyes locked on his. "You've made a career out of tearing people down, but you can't tear down the truth. You can't tear down justice, and you can't tear me down." The words thundered louder than any shout, and the chamber erupted, not in chaos this time, but in stunned applause from those who couldn't hold back. Trump waved his hands dismissively, but the damage was done. Clips of the exchange were already racing across Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire. #fake justice clown. #sweetheart showdown. #justice warrior strikes. Meme pages plastered their faces side by side like boxers before a title fight. Cartoon edits spread, turning Jasmine into a blazing sword of light, Trump into a shadow roaring against it. Within minutes, the battle in the chamber had spilled into living rooms across continents, and still the duel raged on. Trump, desperate to regain footing, leaned into sarcasm, each word dipped in acid. "Oh, please, Jasmine, you're not a warrior. You're a child playing dress-up in armor too big for you. You don't even understand the game you're in." Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low but unshakable. "That's where you're wrong. I don't play games with justice, and I don't play with the lives of the people I swore to defend." Her words hung heavy, slicing through his mockery like a blade through silk. And in that moment, the transformation was complete. This was no longer a hearing, no longer an argument. It had become a modern myth, etched in real time. Every line was a sword, every rebuttal a shield, every pause a clash of titans that echoed far beyond marble walls. Millions leaned closer to their screens. History wasn't being written with ink today. It was being carved, line by line, with words of fire and steel. And then Jasmine Crockett struck with the blow she had been holding in reserve. She lifted a folder, slim, unassuming, yet vibrating with a weight that made the air itself grow heavy. Her voice did not rise. It sank lower, steadier, each word measured, deliberate. "Mr. Trump," she said, "you've called me a liar. You've called this justice a circus. But let's see how the nation feels when it sees what I hold in my hand." The camera zoomed tight, the frame catching the flicker of fire in her eyes. Slowly, she unfolded the papers. Gasps rippled across the chamber. The first page bore a signature, unmistakable and damning. The second page, a transaction record. The third, a letter tying his closest allies to actions that reeked of betrayal. The air shattered. Trump blinked once, then again. For the first time in hours, his voice faltered. That's fake. Everyone knows that's fake. You can't." But the hesitation betrayed him. The confidence cracked. The armor of arrogance, for so long his shield, split at its core. Senators shot to their feet, shouting over one another. Some demanded verification. Others hurled accusations. The chairman's gavel pounded, frantic, drowned by the thunder of voices. The chamber dissolved into chaos. Spectators in the gallery leapt to their feet, screaming, cheering, booing. Some waved papers, others shouted slogans. The energy roared like a riot, spilling through the cameras into millions of living rooms. Hashtags detonated across the internet within seconds. #Trump exposed, #final blow, #justice unleashed. The camera shook, literally trembling, as if even the steel and glass could not withstand the magnitude of the uproar. And still Jasmine stood firm, the evidence clutched like a sword. She raised her voice above the storm, sharp and commanding. "These documents show a betrayal not of me, not of this chamber, but of every American who believed in the promise of truth. This is not politics. This is a crime against justice itself." Her words sliced through the noise. Every syllable landed with the weight of a hammer. Trump surged to his feet, his face a furnace of denial and desperation. "Lies! Forged lies! This is what they do. They fake documents. They fake stories. They fake everything to bring me down." His fist slammed the table, but his words wavered, his voice breaking in ways it had not before. The mask of invincibility was slipping, peeling away beneath the weight of evidence. A senator shouted across the aisle, his voice barely audible over the roar. "This is the end for you, Donald." Another countered, defending him, sparks of rage flying in every direction. The floor had become a battlefield of voices, each one clawing for dominance, for survival. The chairman's gavel hammered again and again, his face pale with strain. "This chamber will come to order. Order!" But order was gone. The chamber was no longer a place of governance. It was a crucible of history. The camera panned across faces etched in disbelief, rage, exhilaration. One senator buried his head in his hands. Another grinned like a man watching the downfall of a tyrant. And Trump, the towering figure, the self-styled master of the storm, now stood trembling, his bravado collapsing under the crushing weight of truth. His voice came again, but softer, strained. You don't understand. This is all politics. It's not real. It's not." The words faded, swallowed by the chaos around him. Jasmine did not relent. Her voice, steady as iron, carried across the chamber. "You called me a fraud. You called me a clown. But tell me, Mr. Trump," she lifted the final page high, "what does that make you when the whole world sees this?" The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. For one suspended heartbeat, the entire chamber seemed frozen. Every eye, every camera, every breath locked on the man at the center. And in that stillness, America saw it. The first true fracture. the weakness he had hidden for so long. It was not just a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. And Donald Trump, for the first time, looked like a man cornered. Jasmine Crockett could feel the momentum surging, the tide carrying her toward the moment she had been building to since the first insult rang across the chamber. She leaned forward, every muscle taut, every word sharpened. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice steady and resonant, "you've called this fake. You've called me a fraud, but let's end the games. One question, one truth, and this room, this country, will know where you stand." The chamber fell into a tense hush. Even the shuffling, the murmurs, the restless tapping of pens ceased. Millions leaned closer to their screens. It was the silence before a verdict, the calm before the guillotine. Jasmine's eyes blazed. She lifted the damning document once more and asked, her voice ringing like a bell across the marble chamber, "Did you or did you not authorize this?" The question slammed into the air like a hammer, direct, simple, unescapable. Trump opened his mouth, and nothing came out. For a heartbeat, for two, he stood frozen, caught in the glare of truth. Then, scrambling, he lashed out with broken fragments of defense. It's not, you don't understand, nobody understands the deals I make, the best deals, the greatest deals. Everyone knows I built this country back, stronger than ever. And this is just paper, fake paper, a disgrace." His words tumbled over each other, collapsing like a house of cards in a storm. The cadence was wrong. The rhythm shattered. It was no longer defiance. It was panic. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She let him spiral. She let the cameras drink in every stammer, every unfinished thought, every desperate deflection. And when the noise of his excuses finally trailed off into ragged silence, she struck again. "Mr. Trump, yes or no?" The chamber quivered. Every ear strained, every eye drilled into him. The gavel hovered in the chairman's hand, but did not fall. "Yes or no?" she repeated, her voice cutting through the suffocating quiet like a blade. Trump's lips parted, trembling. The bravado that had carried him through decades of scandals seemed to wither in an instant. He looked around, at allies who no longer shouted, at opponents whose eyes gleamed with fire, at cameras that stared back unblinking, merciless. And for the first time in living memory, Donald Trump had no words. The silence stretched, cruel and suffocating. Seconds became eternities. The nation held its breath. In living rooms, in bars, in airports, millions stared at their screens, whispering, "Say something, anything." But nothing came. Jasmine's voice broke the silence, quiet but thunderous. "Your silence is your answer." The gallery erupted. Some shouted, some cheered, some cried out in rage. The chamber shook with the force of it, the sound rolling like an earthquake. Trump slammed his hand against the table again, desperate to summon the old fire. But the words that followed were hoarse, hollow. This is not how it works. This is rigged. It's all rigged. They want to destroy me. They've always wanted to destroy me." But it was too late. The silence had already spoken louder than any excuse. The cameras captured it all. The hesitation, the cracks, the collapse. The image of a man once untouchable, now undone by a single question. Jasmine stood tall, her voice rising above the chaos. "This is not about me. This is about the truth. And today, the truth has spoken louder than your lies." Her words echoed like a final judgment. Trump sagged back into his chair, his chest heaving, his face pale with fury and something darker, fear. For once, he had no weapon left. And the chamber, the nation, the world knew it. This was the moment history would replay again and again. The moment when the man who had built his empire on words finally found himself destroyed by silence. The final battle had been fought, and Jasmine Crockett had stood unbroken. But for Donald Trump, the war was far from over, at least in his mind. He tried to rise from his chair, tried to summon the trademark swagger that had carried him through decades of scandals, bankruptcies, and courtroom storms. But his body betrayed him. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembled as he pointed across the chamber. "This is all a setup," he barked, his voice raw, cracking at the edges. "Witch hunt. That's what this is. And you, He jabbed a finger at Jasmine. "You're nothing but a puppet, a disgrace." Yet the words rang hollow. Where once his allies would have roared in agreement, now the silence was deafening. Rows of Republican lawmakers, once eager to shield him, avoided his gaze. Some shifted uncomfortably, others stared down at their notes, unwilling to meet the cameras that devoured every frame. One by one, like dominoes, they slipped away from his side. Not in open defiance, but in something worse, quiet abandonment. The chamber, once split between applause and outrage, now tilted in another direction. Spectators who had cheered Trump's bravado earlier now jeered, their anger sharp and unrelenting. "You're finished," someone shouted from the gallery. "Answer her question," another bellowed. The gavel pounded furiously, but it was useless. The room had become a storm, and the storm had turned against him. Trump's face flushed a deep crimson as he slammed the table again. "I've done more for this country than anyone in history. No one has done what I've done. You should all be thanking me." But the more he raged, the smaller he seemed. Every word, once a weapon, now sounded like a plea. Every gesture, once a show of dominance, now revealed the cracks of desperation. And across from him, Jasmine Crockett stood still as a statue, her head high, her presence towering over the chaos. She did not gloat. She did not jeer. She simply stood, unshaken, resolute, the embodiment of composure under fire. In that stillness, she became something more than a politician. She became an icon. The cameras knew it. The people watching at home felt it. Here was a woman who had stared down the storm and never blinked. Reporters scrambled to push breaking alerts across screens. Within minutes, phones buzzed with headlines that spread like wildfire. Crockett crushes, Trump the knockout of the century. Cable news anchors, barely hiding their awe, replayed the silence. That devastating silence on loop. Clips flooded social media, transforming into instant memes. One showed Jasmine's calm face, a split screen with Trump's frozen silence, captioned, "When truth finally checks your ego." Another had millions laughing and sharing, Trump's stammer overlaid with circus music. The world was watching a collapse in real time. Trump tried again to steady himself, gripping the lectern as if it were the last thing keeping him upright. "You don't get it. You don't get how much people love me. They love me more than anyone. The biggest crowds, the greatest crowds." But the cameras betrayed him, for as he spoke of love, the audience erupted in boos. Not all, not even most, but enough. Enough to pierce the illusion he had clung to for years, and that illusion shattered. He looked around, searching for a friendly face, for even one defender to rise and shield him. But his allies' eyes slid away. Even those who had built their careers on his coattails now inched back, calculating their survival. For the first time, Donald Trump looked truly alone, and Jasmine, calm, unbowed, stood as the counterpoint. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her very presence spoke louder than his shouting. She glanced at the chairman, then at the cameras, and finally back at Trump. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of judgment. "This is not about me. This is not about you. This is about the truth. And today the truth has prevailed." The chamber roared, some in triumph, some in fury. But history didn't care. History had already chosen its headline. That night, as screens across America replayed the footage, one phrase dominated the airwaves, the tweets, the hashtags, the front pages, "The knockout of the century." And in that phrase lived the essence of what had happened. A titan of bluster had fallen. A voice of conviction had risen. Donald Trump, once the master of spectacle, had been undone by his own silence. And Jasmine Crockett had stepped into legend. The chairman's gavel struck one final time, its echo ringing like the closing note of a symphony. The hearing was over, but the aftermath had only just begun. For a moment, the chamber held its breath, as if no one quite knew how to return to the ordinary after witnessing the extraordinary. Then, like a dam breaking, the noise poured in. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Voices rose, overlapping, colliding, trying to capture what words could barely hold. Jasmine didn't flinch. She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately, every motion calm in the chaos. Around her, staffers and supporters moved with the energy of victory, but she herself radiated something different. Not triumph, but gravity. As though she understood that this was bigger than her, bigger than Trump, bigger than the chamber itself. On the other side, Trump slumped into his chair before aides rushed to his side. They tried to shield him from the swarm of journalists pressing closer, but the image was already captured. A once mighty figure, cornered, diminished, fleeing the battlefield in defeat. When he finally rose, his walk was hurried, almost stumbling. Cameras followed as he exited, the crowd pressing around him like vultures circling a wounded beast. Shouts cut through the din. "Mr. Trump, do you have a response to the evidence? Are your allies abandoning you? Do you regret facing her today?" He didn't answer, or perhaps he couldn't. The man who once thrived on owning the spotlight now looked as if it burned him. Every flashbulb was a reminder of the silence that had cost him everything. Meanwhile, Jasmine stepped into the hall, and the energy shifted. Applause erupted spontaneously from those gathered outside. Staffers, activists, ordinary citizens who had waited for hours just to glimpse history unfold. Phones lifted, capturing her stride, her poise, her unwavering gaze forward. And in that hallway, the first chant was born. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" It spread like wildfire. From the marble steps of the Capitol to the screens of millions, the word pulsed, alive and unstoppable. By nightfall, hashtags blazed across social media. #JusticeWarrior, #Crockett Moment, #TruthWins. News anchors spoke with reverence usually reserved for battlefield victories. Pundits debated whether this was the political end of Donald Trump. But outside the noise of analysis, the people knew what they had seen. They had watched power bend. They had witnessed arrogance fall silent before truth. Jasmine Crockett was hailed not just as a congresswoman, but as something rarer, a symbol, an emblem of resilience in a world starving for it. A reminder that courage, wielded with precision, could still cut through the fog of spectacle. Trump, for his part, vanished into motorcades and guarded exits. But even there, he could not escape. Every channel replayed the moment he faltered. Every headline carried his collapse. Every whisper on the street carried the same judgment. He had been beaten, and not by bluster, but by clarity. In homes across America, families sat around dinner tables and spoke of what they had seen. In classrooms, teachers replayed clips to students, framing it as history in the making. In offices, debates raged, but even Trump's staunchest defenders struggled to spin away the silence that had screamed louder than any denial. By midnight, one phrase dominated the airwaves: the knockout of the century. But beneath the spectacle of that headline, something deeper stirred. Because this was never just a hearing. It was never just a clash of two names. It was the story of what happens when truth refuses to bow, when justice finds a voice, when history sharpens its pen and carves a moment into stone. As the Capitol lights dimmed and the country settled into uneasy sleep, the echo of that day lingered. In the silence after the shouting, in the stillness after the storm, a realization remained. This had not merely been testimony. It had been testimony turned to anthem. Not just politics, but poetry written in fire and resolve. And in the annals of America's long, turbulent saga, it would be remembered not as a hearing, but as a ballad of justice, a hymn of defiance, a legend born in the crucible of truth. The gavel had fallen, but its sound still rolled across the nation, a heartbeat that would not fade. This was not the end. This was the beginning of the story justice would tell for generations. In the end, the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump was not merely about power or politics. It was about the unshakable truth that justice, though often mocked, tested, and cornered, can still rise and command silence from even the loudest voices. We are reminded that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to yield when the stakes are highest. And if one voice, steady and unbroken, can shift the course of history, then perhaps within each of us lies the same power: to stand, to speak, and to protect what is right. If this clash shook you, don't just move on. Carry it. Share it. Let it spark a conversation about what justice really means. Like, comment, and send it to someone who knows silence can be broken. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where truth gets the last word. Hit the bell, because the next reckoning won't be quiet. It will be fierce, and it might just make you question what power really is. This is a fictional dramatization, born from real struggles, real injustice, and the courage to resist. Any resemblance is symbolic, a mirror for all of us to see, to learn, to reflect. Thank you for watching. Justice isn't given, it's fought for. This is Harrison Stories.